We're continuing Perek Daled Halacha Gimel, the second half of the shiur. We're down to the Shitas HaGoinim. There's a third Shita as to whether when one transgresses for a goy's chametz. The Shitas HaGoinim. A Yisrael that left his chametz by a Yisrael, his friend, or by a goy, and the other Yisrael or the goy accepted responsibility. The achrayis for the chametz. Since they accept the responsibility, the person who gave it, is no longer liable for it. Only the one who accepted upon himself the achrayis is liable. But Rabbeinu Yoin and the Rosh have the opinion that the person who gave it is over if he does not burn it because it's his chametz. It was his chametz. We'll go to the next page. The Beis Yosef says that the Rosh is of the opinion, like the Rambam, that even when the chametz of Yisrael is found by a goy, the Yisrael is over min Torah, and therefore he's obligated to burn it, destroy it. The Beis Yosef explains what the Ran writes in the name of the Ramban, that if you gave it to a goy, the mafkid, the one who gave it, is not over min Torah. So the Rosh says, in the name of some of the goyinim, that's the din when you give it over to a Jewish friend as well, that the one who gives it over is not liable. But the Beis Yosef explains that the Rosh is saying in the name of Rabbeinu Yoina that for chametz is considered in the possession of the person who gave it over, as the Rambam says. The Yisrael that gave his chametz even to a goy, that Yisrael is over bal yirah bal yemotza. On what the Beis Yosef says, that these two dinim, these two laws, have associated one with the other, meaning was taking responsibility or where it's found, we have to question this on the Torah. He writes that his father, the Rosh, agreed with Rabbeinu Tam that goy who gives chametz to Yisrael, even if the Yisrael accepted that responsibility, it helps by setting aside a place in the house that it should belong to the goy. Now the Torah writes that the Rosh is not of the opinion, like the goinim, that the mafkid is not over because it's not in his possession, but rather that the mafkid, even if Yisrael gave it over to the goy, he is transgress. And he still mentions that the Rosh says that even if, when a Jew accepted a responsibility on a chametz of a goy, and thus, in a sense, it's his chametz, he can still set aside for the goy a separate place in the house. And how can the two go together? If it's the Jews, then even if it's by someone else, the Rosh says he's over bal yirah bal yemotza. Because it would seem from all the Rishonim that we mentioned that two things are dependent one on the other. He can only give it to a house if he accepted it on achrayis, only if we hold like the Shitas Rambam, that Yisrael who gives his chametz into the rishus of Anochri, min Torah, he's not obligated to burn it. And how can the Rosh say that he is of the opinion that Yisrael's chametz, wherever it is, he's chayav to burn? Yet, if a goy gives it to him and he accepts his responsibility, then it helps if he gives him a place to store it, because it's considered the chametz of the Yisrael in the rishus of a goy. So how do you make the two statements jibe? The Shagas Arya disagrees with the Beis Yosef and says the goinim only meant where that you can give it to somebody else where the goy accepts the responsibility. That the accepting of the responsibility causes that the Yisrael who gave it over, the goy, is no longer transgressing bal yirah bal yemotza, and not the place where it's found. How, according to the Ran in the Ramban, in what the Ramban says, it depends on the one who gave it b'rshus goy, and the chametz is not in his possession. It doesn't matter if it's a goy receives the achrayus or not, that you are liable. Therefore, you're not liable even though the chametz is a Jew's, because the Isser of Lo Yirah V'Lo Yimotz is only in the person's house, according to the Ramban. And the Shagas Ayah continues that even according to the Goinim, the Yisrael who gave his chometz by a Goy, and the Goy accepted Achrayas, and he's saying that that's the only reason the Yisrael would not be over. Einan Yisrael over by Yirah by Yimotza. That's why he's not liable. The Goinim will agree with the Rambam that if the Goy didn't accept Achrayas, it's very likely that the Yisrael is over by Yirah by Yimotza and Torah on his chometz, which is even though it's in the rishus of a Goy. And he's only poter only when the Goy accepted Achrayas on the chometz, and the accepting of responsibility of the Goy is the reason why he's poter, because it's in the possession of the Goy, and it's also, in a sense, belonging to the Goy because he's responsible for it. We'll turn the page. Thus, according to the Beishez of the Rambam, Yisrael gave his chometz into Goy's rishus. He's over by Yirah by Yimotze, like the Rosh Min Torah, that even when the Nochri accepted Achrayas, the Yisrael is still over. According to the Shagas Ayah, if the Goy would accept responsibility for the chometz of Yisrael, it could be that the Rambam will also agree with the Goyim that you do not transgress on by Yirah by Yimotze, because the acceptance of responsibility by the Goy takes away the obligation from the owner. And the chometz is considered the chometz of a Goy, and it's also in the possession of a Goy. The Pri Megadim discusses this in Siman Tov Mem and many other poskim, and we're not going to go into it more than we have so far. Now, if it's not his, it's not in his rishus. The Rambam writes, if he didn't accept responsibility for the achrayas, responsibility for the Goy's chometz that was placed by him, he can keep it in his house, and he can eat from it after Pesach, because it belonged to the Goy the whole time. It was the Goy's house, which was in his house, a section, and it was the Goy's. And he already wrote this in Halacha Beis. The chometz shel Hegdish, the chometz of a Goy, or Hegdish, which is by Yisrael, even if it's in his house, it's mutter because it's not his. Why does he have to repeat it here, that he's not chayav to destroy it, and he can keep it, if he already said it's not his? Furthermore, in Halacha Beis he writes, because it's not his. And here he writes, because it belongs to the Goy. What's the difference between whether it's not his or it belongs to the Goy? Possibly we can answer according to the Kesef Mishnah that the Rambam is of the opinion that chometz of a Jew, which is in the possession of a Goy, Yisrael transgresses, because it says bibotechem, which would mean that it's forbidden to give it to a Goy when the place where it's placed is belongs is the Jews, because his chometz is there. Even though it's by a Goy, it's considered the house of the Jew. Thus, chometz Yisrael, which is found in the house of a Nochri, is as if it's sitting in his own home, because he's the owner of the chometz, and the place it's his. According to this, the Rambam will be of the opinion that that verse is also true. When the chometz of a Goy is found in the house of the Yisrael, even when he didn't set aside a space specifically for the Goy, it's considered as if it's by the Goy's in the Goy's hand, because he gave it to the Jew to watch. So the Jew, when he sets it down, that's the place where it belongs to the Goy, and that value is being watched, but the value belongs to the person who gave it, who is the placer, the Goy. The Yisrael left a place in his house for the chometz to the Goy. Therefore, the Rambam says here in Halacha Gimel that the chometz is in rishus HaGoy, meaning it's actually in his dwelling within the house of the Jew, and therefore it's mutter after Pesach. But in Halacha Beis he's talking when the Nochri came into the house of a Jew without giving him anything, and Yisrael didn't give him a place. He's just sitting there and eating his own chometz. And even though that the chometz is found in the possession of a Jew's house, it's within the confines of the house, he does not have to burn it, because we learn from the Pasuk, only your chometz you have to you're responsible for, but not that of others, meaning that of a Goy or of Hegdish. And this chometz is not his, as we mentioned in Halacha Beis. And in the next shiur, we'll learn Halacha Daled.